All right, next up we have the South America League, which runs from June 14th to July 26th. Definitely the most competitive league currently, and I think it has been for some time. And it's definitely going to be very hard to rank, especially the top six teams in this league. I think it's going to be another very tight stage uh, for South America here. And we also have some new orgs joining the scene, whether they're coming in through the new affiliate program or partner program, and we also have some promotions from Challenger League as well. So first up, we have the 9Z team. This is the only team in the South America League with a majority Argentinian roster. I believe they just do still have two Brazilian players on the roster. And I think this may be the only team in the league with Argentinian players on the roster as well. Every other player, I believe, is Brazilian. So I do have them at the bottom here. We've seen some of these players play in the old previous LATAM league where they had the um, Mexican teams play and then the Central American teams play and then also the basically the teams that aren't from Brazil play from South America, and none of those teams were very good in my opinion, and I just don't really see this going anywhere in my opinion right now. And I think they could get, now that they're in a very competitive league, I think they could get good with the good practice they'll probably get now. Um, but I think it'll take some time for that to happen. So next we have Los. Los are back after their very weird year in the North American League, where they brought a Brazilian roster to compete in North American League, and they did absolutely horrible, and got basically kicked out essentially. So they ended up moving back to South America. I mean, where they belong really, because they had all Brazilian players anyways. And they made a couple roster changes. They've added Kurtz and Mr. Sex Outlaw, and they qualified to the league through Challenger League. They got second in Challenger League, which was enough to make the South American League. You needed to make top two in CL. I also don't think this team is still going to be very good here because, yes, they're back in Brazil, but they still have that same core that was performing very poorly. Now, they kept the better players, in my opinion, from that core that was performing poorly, but I still don't think they're going to be able to compete with the upper echelon teams really whatsoever. So that's why I have them down here at number 9. Next, we have ENX, the other South American Challenger League team. They got first in Challenger League and qualified to Pro League. A roster with kind of just a mix of players. They have Sexy Cake, who was last on Los, I believe. Florio, previously from Black Dragons. I think Nigel was last on Elevate Academy. And then they have two players who I think they're rookies, Angels and Voxera. And this is just kind of, again, it's kind of just like a startup team here where this team needs to, build chemistry in that. I think they're better. They'll be better than, like the teams that I think will be like really bad, like 9Z and Los. I mean, the ENX have already beaten Los, of course, to get first place in the Challenger League. So I do think they'll be a little better than the worst, but I still think they're going to be in the bottom half of teams. Next, we got Black Dragons. They basically gutted their roster in the offseason, except for Hornatow, and they kept their coach Ghost. So they have dropped out Guto, Nuxka, Ask went to Liquid, and I forget their last player. Um, but anyways, yeah, they basically gutted the roster and they picked up other Brazilian players that have all played T1 before. They got Flashtree from the Raza Company Academy because he was the only one who didn't go to Loud. Machina, who was previously on MIBR. Rare was also previously on MIBR. And then Muzi was last with NIP. This is just kind of like a mix of players who who just really all got dropped recently, and they're just like putting them together. And I think this team will, again, Black Dragons is just starting a rebuild here. And the same process will probably happen again where they'll have a rebuild, and the rebuild will either go well, and it usually does for a bit, and that usually results in some of their players getting poached, some of their best players, and then when that happens, they start being bad, and then they kind of reset again. Black Dragons have never been really a top contender because of that reason, but they've always been good enough to maybe threaten to make a top 4 spot at times, but I just don't think this mix of players is really ready for that yet. Next, we have NIP. They actually are going into this stage without Psycho for the first time in, well, forever, because Psycho was with NIP from the beginning. He's the final member of the original NIP team to now be gone, and he's no longer here. He's been replaced with Wizard, who was on NIP before. Not to be confused, there's another player named Wizard in the European League. This is not that Wizard. This is the Wizard that was with Ninjas of Pajamas previously, then got dropped, played with Los for a bit, then got dropped, and now he's back on NIP. Besides that, NIP had the same roster heading into the stage. They still have Pino, Cons, Fantasy, and Hates, and they promoted their analyst Dan to the head coaching position after they got rid of their previous coach. I think it was T-Chubs who was coaching them at the time. If anyone's familiar with, I believe he was coaching the Mexico Major winning T1 team back in the day, and then was on NIP until now. Next up, we're going to have Liquid. We saw Liquid recently play at the Reload event where they got eliminated by CAG. It was pretty funny because they were very pissed off during that match, and it's really why they lost, that they got in their own heads. I do think Liquid will be a good team. From here on, like from Liquid to who I have in the number 1 spot is basically, it's just so hard to order who I think will be like in the spots. It really could be anyone because the rest of these teams I think are very, very top of the line. So yeah, in the off season, right before Reload, Liquid added Ask and Diaz, and I think there were 2 good changes to the roster. They finally let go of Palu, who had been on the team for I think like 6 years, I believe. And Palu has moved on to W7M, and they've also promoted Tice from their assistant coach to their head coach after Hugzord left the team. And they also acquired Lenda from the old Team Joel / ex-Bleed roster as their new analyst. So I think they've made a lot of good moves here to get them back in position to contend for that spot again. But I still think there are teams that I have a more confidence in than Liquid. Next, we have Loud, a team that really last year kind of just came out of nowhere because at the beginning of last year, they qualified this roster, the core of this team at least, qualified to their first major ever in Manchester, and they got smoked. And then they didn't make the next major. They made some changes before SI, qualified to SI through LCQ, and then they made top 6. And then after that, they got picked up by Loud after being orgless, which was huge for them. I believe Loud is the biggest org in Brazil, I think, in terms of just like following and support that they receive. So they have the same roster they did under Raza at Company Academy, except they've swapped out Flash Tree for Daffodil. I think that was a really good change. I thought Daffodil looked quite good as their new support player at a Reload, where Loud played into a top 8 position and then ended up being eliminated by, I believe it was Furia. So yeah, I definitely think Loud will be a competitive team this stage and looking to make it into one of the top spots to knock out one of what I consider like, the legacy teams like Furia, Faze, Liquid, etc. So next up we got W7M. I think another very strong roster that can pretty much beat any team in Brazil on any given day. Um, they swapped out Dash for Palu in the offseason in a huge change, marking the end of Palu's over 6 year tenure with Liquid. And I just really like this team. They have really good strategy, and I think with the new Siege X system, they'll only continue to get better. So I do think this team will certainly be contending for the number one spot in Brazil. But I have them at number three for now because there are two other teams ahead of them that I can't reason to put any lower as well. So next up, we got Furia. I think everybody knows this team. They've had this same roster for over 2 years now, whether it was under W7M or Furia. Just coming off of their big win in Reload, their first win in over a year. Um, Nothing to say besides, just an incredible roster, continuing to be very dominant. Now, typically, they aren't always as good regionally as they are internationally, even though they do play well against their opponents in the regional leagues as well. But yeah, I Furia, they're here to stay. I don't see them really dropping out of being a top three team in the league here. So that's why I have them up here. And the last team, of course, even though they didn't even make playoffs at Reload, we have Faze again, similar situation as Furia. They have the same roster, same coach. They did add an analyst, JP, after the Six Invitational, but basically the same team still. And again, yes, as I said, they didn't do too hot at Reload, but I still think it's an incredible roster. They still won SI in 2025, and their track record in the Brazil League is just incredible. They haven't lost the Brazil League in over 2 years now. They got first place in both stage 1 and 2 of 2023. They got first place in stage 1 and 2 of 2024 as well. So I think FaZe are here to stay, and I don't really have a reason to move them out of the number one spot. Next up, the stakes. So it's the same as North America here, where if you are in those top four spots, you will get a spot at the Esports World Cup this year in the summer, I believe in August. $2 million prize pool at that event. And top five teams get SI points. Of course, you want that first place 300 big ones. Second at 150 is pretty good as well. And then third, fourth, and fifth kind of get a little consolation prize of SI points. And yeah, you really don't want to be in the bottom six teams or bottom five teams, 6th to 10th, that's what I meant, because you just get nothing there besides maybe a little money, but nothing really worthwhile. So yeah, this is what I think about Brazil heading into the stage. Let me know what you think about Brazil, or if you are interested in Brazil and never watched Brazil Siege before, because it's probably the best quality of Siege I think you can watch if you ever are interested in watching Siege esports. So yeah, thank you and have a good rest of your day.